The phone rang. My son Scott's voice came on the line. "Mom, about Christmas this year, you'll be on your own. We want our own private space." It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. Each word, colder than the winter wind whipping outside, cut straight into my heart. "I understand, dear," I replied, my voice so calm it surprised even me. What Scott didn't know, what his perfect little family had no idea about, was that 6 months ago, I didn't just beat the cancer that nearly took my life, I also took the $10 million life insurance policy from my late husband and bought a secluded resort on Lake Tahoe. In their eyes, I was just their frail, widowed mother, scraping by on a shoestring. Meanwhile, I was planning the rebirth of my life, a celebration to which they would never be invited. I'm Diane, a 66-year-old widow living by the peaceful shores of Lake Tahoe, and this is the story of how I left behind the people who took me for granted to finally live the quiet life I always deserved. If this story speaks to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. Knowing these stories connect with you is all the encouragement I need to keep sharing. The soft hiss of the old fireplace was my only companion on those December afternoons. Outside my window, the first snowflakes of the season had begun their slow, silent dance, blurring the familiar view of Lake Tahoe. They were gentle, fragile things, just like the hope I'd been quietly nursing in my heart. My apartment, tucked away in a quiet complex, was always kept cozy. Every corner held a chapter of my life. The wedding photo of me and my late husband, William, still smiling brightly from the mantelpiece. The throw pillows I'd embroidered myself when my son was just a boy. And on the table, a basket of pine cones I'd gathered on my morning walk, their earthy, resinous scent filling the air. This place was a museum of memories, a safe harbor, but sometimes its silence was just too loud, too heavy. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one William had bought me for our first Christmas after we moved here. My hand traced the worn-out wood, feeling every scratch like a footprint of time. A sense of anticipation filled me. It wasn't the giddy, youthful excitement, but a quiet, almost habitual waiting. I was waiting for a phone call, the call that would confirm what I already assumed. The holiday plans, the gifts I needed to buy for my 10-year-old grandson, Owen, and of course, which day I'd be driving up the mountain to spend Christmas with my son's family. Things had changed in recent years. The change didn't come like a sudden storm, but more like the slow, steady erosion of a shoreline. Ever since Scott, my only child, married Jennifer, the warm family traditions William and I had worked so hard to build began to fade. Evenings spent baking gingerbread cookies were replaced with formal cocktail parties. Heartfelt, handmade gifts were pushed aside for expensive, brand-name items hastily ordered online. I tried to adapt. I learned how to dress for the party's theme, how to smile at sophisticated jokes I didn't understand, and how to stay silent when Jennifer would hint that the dishes I brought didn't quite go with the wine pairings. I did it all because Scott was all I had, and Owen, that boy, was the light of my life. But this year, something felt different. The silence had stretched on longer than usual. Thanksgiving came and went with a vague excuse about a last-minute trip with Jennifer's family. I told myself Christmas would be different. Christmas was sacred. Nobody could take Christmas away from a grandmother. I stared at the calendar on the wall. The December days circled in red, and my heart gave a little squeeze. The waiting was no longer peaceful. It was starting to feel laced with anxiety. And then it rang. The shrill sound of the landline, an old-fashioned thing I kept for sentimental reasons, cut through the silence with a cruel sort of finality. I knew who it was. Only one person could make my heart pound this way, a mix of hope and dread. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, and picked up the receiver. "Hello? Mom, it's me," Scott's voice. It no longer held the warmth of the little boy who used to run home to show me his A+ on a math test. This voice had been polished by cold boardrooms, shaped by business jargon, and a constant sense of urgency. It was efficient, precise, but it lacked warmth. "Hi, honey. I was just thinking about you. The first snow is so beautiful, isn't it?" I tried to start with small talk, a flimsy bridge across the invisible distance between us. "Yeah, it is. Look, Mom, I'm calling to talk quickly about the Christmas plans." He got straight to the point, no hesitation. I gripped the arm of the chair. This was it. "Oh, of course. Go ahead, dear." There was a short pause on his end, just long enough for me to hear his stifled sigh. "Mom, this year we've decided to do something a little different. Jennifer and I talked it over, and we want to have a really private holiday." The word private was uttered, sharp as a shard of broken glass. It hung in the air between us. I swallowed hard. "Private? What do you mean?" "Well, you know, Jennifer's family has these new traditions they want to start. Her parents are coming up. We just want to focus on the nuclear family this year, Mom. Just us and Owen. A small, cozy Christmas." Nuclear family. That cold, scientific term hit my ears like a judgment. It drew a perfect circle, and I was standing on the outside, a non-essential entity. I suddenly pictured myself as a stray electron, repelled from the warm orbit I once occupied by a new, more perfect atomic structure. I was once the sun in my son's universe. Now, I wasn't even a planet. I was just a stray piece of rock, drifting aimlessly in the cold, empty space. "Do you understand, Mom?" Scott's voice pulled me from my chaotic thoughts. There was an edge of impatience in his question, as if he just wanted to get an unpleasant task over with and hang up. 1,000 words caught in my throat. "No, I don't understand. I don't understand why you let your wife decide if I get to see my own grandson on Christmas. I don't understand how you've forgotten all the winters we decorated the tree together, the smell of my gingerbread cookies filling the kitchen. I don't understand when you became this man." But I didn't say any of it. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. A calm born from the very bottom of hurt when you realize that screaming won't change a thing. "I understand." My voice was even, devoid of any emotion. I was surprised at my own control. Perhaps this was the final gift the illness had given me, the ability to face the harshest truths without crumbling. "Really?" "Oh, great." Scott breathed a sigh of relief, the tension vanishing from his voice. He was off the hook. "I knew you'd understand. You've always been so reasonable. Well, have a Merry Christmas then. We'll stop by sometime after the holidays." "Of course," I replied, my voice still as flat as an undisturbed lake. "You all have a wonderful time." I hung up before he could say anything more. The hard plastic receiver hit the cradle with a dry, final click that echoed in the deafening silence of the room. My hand remained on the phone, my fingers cold as ice. I sat there, motionless, staring out the window. The snowflakes didn't seem so magical anymore. They were falling thick and fast now, a cold, white curtain slowly descending, blanketing the world and isolating me in my own private pain. There were no tears. I had cried too many of them over the past 6 months, in the long, lonely nights at the hospital. Those tears were for fear and physical pain. This pain was different. It was a deep, empty hole in my chest. Tears couldn't fill it. I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that when I finally stood up, my legs were stiff. The sky outside had turned to the deep purple of a winter dusk. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows into the room. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted to stay in this darkness a little longer, to let the raw truth of what had just happened sink in. My son, the child I had spent my entire life loving and protecting, had just politely slammed the door in my face. And the worst part was, he didn't even realize it. Or maybe he did, and he chose to ignore it. I didn't know which was more painful. A shiver ran down my spine. But it wasn't from the cold. It was the beginning of something new. A feeling I hadn't felt in years. It was anger. A tiny, smoldering ember began to glow in that deep, empty hole. It wasn't a destructive rage, but a fire of self-preservation, of trampled dignity. It whispered to me, "Why? Why are you accepting this? You fought for your life, not to live like a shadow, waiting for handouts of affection from others." That phone call, in all its cruelty disguised as civility, became a turning point. It wasn't just a Christmas rejection. It was the culmination of every time I'd been overlooked, every bitter pill I'd had to swallow, every time I'd made myself smaller so as not to disturb their perfect life. And in that moment, under the dim glow of the streetlight and the still falling snow, I knew I couldn't go on like this. I would not let them steal my Christmas. I would not let my second chance at life be tainted by their carelessness. The darkness in my apartment was no longer frightening. It became a companion, a quiet space for me to piece together the shattered fragments of my mind. I didn't turn on the lights. The pale, yellow glow from the street lamp and the dancing flames in the fireplace were more than enough. No, I wouldn't cry. Those tears had dried up on hospital pillows during the long nights when I faced the ghost of my own mortality. Tonight, crying was a luxury I wouldn't allow myself. To cry was to accept being a victim, and I was so tired of playing that part. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked past the large mirror in the living room, a wedding anniversary gift. In the dim light, I saw the reflection of a six-year-old woman. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, the lines around her eyes and mouth telling stories of laughter and worry, but her eyes held a different light tonight. The weary resignation was gone. In its place was a cold glint, as hard as tempered steel. That woman in the mirror wasn't the Diane of an hour ago. She died with the dry click of that telephone receiver. I went into my bedroom, where I kept my quiet treasures. Not diamonds or pearls, but things far more precious. I opened the oaken wardrobe, the familiar scent of mothballs wafting out. On the top shelf, next to stacks of yellowed linens, was a wicker knitting basket. Inside, a ball of soft, jade-green yarn lay peacefully. Beside it were my bamboo knitting needles, cool to the touch. I took them out, feeling their familiar weight in my palm. This was the Christmas gift I had planned for Owen. A sweater, not a flashy video game, not a designer outfit Jennifer would buy for him. Just a sweater, made from thousands of stitches, hundreds of hours of patience, and an immeasurable amount of love. As I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the needles, their coldness transported me to another place, a place I had tried to forget but never could. The memories came flooding back, vivid and cruel. The sterile white room, the biting smell of antiseptic, overpowering even the scent of the lilies Mrs. Gable from downstairs had brought. The steady, soulless beep of the heart monitor was the soundtrack to my endless days. I lay there, small and helpless amidst the starched white sheets. My body was no longer my own. It was a battlefield, a war zone between foreign cells and toxic chemicals. An IV line was taped to the back of my hand, pumping a liquid into me that both sustained my life and ravaged it. Every breath was an effort. Even the thin blanket felt as heavy as lead. 6 months ago, the doctor had given me 2 words: breast cancer. Those 2 words redrew the entire map of my world. Everything that had once seemed so big and important suddenly became trivial, and everything that had been small, like the morning sun streaming through the hospital window, became infinitely precious. In those days, loneliness was my closest companion. Scott visited, of course. He'd come, sit in the visitor's chair, his eyes constantly darting to his watch and his phone. He asked the formulaic questions. "How are you feeling, Mom? What did the doctor say? Do you need anything?" But I could see his mind was elsewhere, in meetings, on financial reports, caught up in the pressures of a life in which I was no longer a central part. He brought expensive fruit baskets and glossy magazines. But the one thing I truly needed, his time and his full presence, was something he didn't have to give. It was in that profound loneliness that I found a lifeline. It was this knitting basket. I had asked Mrs. Gable to bring it to me. At first, I barely had the strength to hold the needles. My fingers were clumsy and trembled, but I persisted. I started to knit. 1 stitch, 2 stitches. Each stitch was an act of defiance. Defiance against the weakness of my body, defiance against the despair creeping into my mind. Each stitch was a prayer. Please, give me 1 more day. Please, let me see Owen grow up. Please, just 1 more Christmas. I was knitting this sweater for Owen. I pictured him wearing it, running through the snow, his face flushed from the cold. I imagined the warmth of these threads enveloping him, like my own arms. This sweater was more than a gift. It was my last will and testament, my love woven into a tangible form, just in case I couldn't be there to give that love myself. I poured every ounce of my remaining strength into each and every stitch, into every loop of that jade green yarn. It became my reason to wake up in the morning, my reason to endure the pain and the nausea that followed each round of treatment. And then, one June afternoon, as the bright summer sun danced outside my window, I sat there, looking at my work. The sweater was almost finished, and I remember making a promise to myself, a solemn, silent vow. "Diane," I told myself, "look at what you've done. You've fought. You've stared death in the face and you didn't back down. If God grants you a second chance, if you walk out of this hospital on your own 2 feet, you must promise one thing. You will not waste it living a borrowed life. You will not live by the expectations of others. You will never again let your silence be mistaken for consent. You will live a life so full, so vibrant, that every single extra moment you've been given will have been worth it." That promise became my guiding star. And the day the doctors told me I was in remission, I knew I had a debt to pay, a debt to my own life. The crackle of a log in the fireplace pulled me back to the present. The chill of the needles in my hand seemed to have vanished. I looked down at the unfinished sweater. It was no longer a symbol of hope. After Scott's call, it had become a symbol of lost innocence. I gently placed it back in the knitting basket and pushed the basket deep into the corner of the wardrobe. That chapter was closed. My love could not be given in the same way anymore. It had been refused. I stood up and walked over to William's small, walnut writing desk. This was where he used to manage our family's investments, where he taught me the basics of the stock market and real estate. Everyone, including Scott, thought that after William passed, I was living off a meager pension and what little savings we had left. They were wrong. William didn't just leave me with his love. He left me with knowledge and a wisely built investment portfolio. And for the past 15 years, I hadn't just protected it, I had grown it. I opened the bottom drawer, where I kept my most important things. Not old photo albums or love letters. It was a dark wooden box, lined with red velvet. I opened it carefully. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a collection of neatly filed documents. On top was William's $2 million life insurance policy. Beneath that were financial statements showing how that money, along with other investments, had grown into a figure that would stun even Scott with all his financial bravado. And finally, at the very bottom of the box was what I was looking for. A thick stack of papers, carefully clipped together. It was the deed to a piece of property. And next to it, a heavy, intricately crafted set of silver keys that felt substantial in my palm. I had bought it last month, right after I received my best-ever health report. It was the first step in fulfilling my promise. A luxurious resort-style mansion, nestled on a private plot of land on the shore of Lake Tahoe, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows looking out over the water and the snow-capped peaks. It had 8 bedrooms, a wine cellar, a 2-story library, and a private boat dock. It was everything William and I had ever dreamed of, a dream we thought would never come true. The price was $10 million, and I had paid for it in cash. When I signed that check, I felt no sting of loss. I felt a release. It wasn't an extravagance, it was an investment in the rest of my life. I picked up the keys, my fingers tracing their ornate details. These weren't just keys to a house, they were the keys to my freedom, the keys to a new life, a life lived on my own terms. I looked out the window one more time. The snow had stopped. The night sky was clear, sparkling with a million stars. The moon hung over the lake, creating a shimmering silver path on the water. The world outside was no longer a cold, isolating place. It was a breathtaking landscape, a perfect backdrop. In the days following that fateful phone call, I existed in a state of strange tranquility. The initial anger had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. Like a general preparing for a decisive battle, I spent my time planning, calculating every move. I no longer felt hurt. Instead, I felt a surge of powerful energy, a sense of control I hadn't had in years. I was no longer passively waiting for life to happen to me. I was going to create it. However, before I could set my plan in motion, I needed one final confirmation, one irrefutable piece of evidence that I wasn't imagining their carelessness, that my decision was absolutely the right one. I needed to face them one more time, not as a spurned mother, but as a quiet observer. I needed to look them in the eye and see the unvarnished truth. A few days before Christmas, I decided to drive over to Scott and Jennifer's house. I told myself I was just dropping off Owen's gift, but deep down, I knew I was looking for an excuse. Their house was in an upscale neighborhood where lawns were perfectly manicured even under a thin layer of snow, and enormous Christmas wreaths hung on every door. Scott and Jennifer's house was the largest and most modern, all sharp angles and cold glass walls. It looked more like an art gallery than a home. I always felt out of place whenever I stepped inside, like an antique mistakenly placed in a minimalist space. I parked on the street, not in their driveway. A flicker of hesitation went through me. Did I really want to do this? Did I have the strength to endure one more hurt? But then the image of my own tired face in the hospital mirror returned. The promise I made to myself echoed in my mind. I took a deep breath, retrieved the carefully wrapped gift from the back seat, and got out of the car. The box contained the jade green sweater. After a night of reflection, I had decided to finish it. Not because I still hoped Owen would wear it, but because I needed to finish what I had started. Completing that sweater was a symbolic act, my way of telling myself that I never give up, not in my fight against illness, and not in the fight for my own dignity. This gift was no longer for Owen, it was for me. I rang the doorbell. It took a long moment for the door to open. Jennifer stood there, dressed in a designer cream-colored yoga set that looked more expensive than my best wool coat. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect top knot, her face impeccably made up. She looked like she'd just stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. "Diane? I wasn't expecting you." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. A flicker of annoyance crossed her carefully curated features. "Hello, Jennifer. I won't stay long. I just have an early Christmas gift for Owen." I held up the box, trying to keep my own smile looking natural. She glanced at the box, then at me, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my outfit, a simple beige turtleneck and slacks. In Jennifer's world, simplicity was synonymous with mediocrity. "Oh, you didn't have to do that. I've already bought him plenty of gifts," she said, but she reluctantly stepped back, granting me a narrow entry. I stepped into the vast living room, where everything was white, gray, or black. A gigantic Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with silver baubles and white ribbons, looking as cold and sterile as the rest of the house. Owen was sitting on a plush white rug, his eyes glued to a tablet. He didn't even look up when I came in. "Owen, say hello to your grandmother." Jennifer's voice had a sharp edge. The boy startled, looking up. "Hi, Grandma," he mumbled, his eyes already drifting back to the screen. A pang went through my heart. There was a time when he would have run to me, throwing his arms around my legs. Now there was an invisible wall between us, a wall built of tablets and rules about focused time. "I have a present for you, Owen," I said, my voice gentle. This time, he put the tablet down and looked at me with curiosity. I placed the gift in front of him. Owen eagerly tore off the wrapping paper. When he pulled out the sweater, his eyes lit up. "It's green! My favorite color!" he exclaimed, hugging it to his chest. "It's so soft, Grandma." A tiny spark of warmth flickered within me. It was extinguished almost immediately. Jennifer walked over and took the sweater from Owen's hands. She held it out at a distance, between two fingers, as if it were contaminated. A subtle frown appeared between her perfectly tweezed eyebrows. "Oh," she said, drawing out the word. "Thank you, Diane. It's so vintage." Coming from her, the word vintage sounded like an insult. It meant old-fashioned, outdated, folksy. I remained silent, waiting. She held the sweater up, inspecting the stitches. "Did you knit this yourself? Do people still do that?" Then she turned to Owen, her voice sickly sweet. "Honey, thank your grandma, but I don't think this color goes with the winter color palette I've chosen for you this year. It would just clash with your whole ensemble." The smile vanished from Owen's face. He looked at the sweater, then at his mother, completely bewildered. Just then, Scott came down the stairs. He was on his phone, a tense look on his face. "No, I want that report on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. No excuses." He ended the call, then saw me. "Mom, when did you get here?" he asked, a note of surprise in his voice, but no real pleasure. "I just brought a Christmas gift for Owen." I replied, my voice now stripped of its earlier warmth. Scott glanced at the sweater in Jennifer's hands. He didn't even give it a proper look. "Oh, that's nice. But Mom," he said, his tone like he was giving me sage advice, "next time, just buy something. Your time is precious. Don't waste it on these things anymore. You can get anything with the click of a button these days." And that was it. The final straw. My time is precious. Yes, it is, Scott. It's more precious than you could ever imagine. It's the time I clawed back from the jaws of death. And my son, the child I brought into this world, had just told me that the love, the patience, and the sheer will I had poured into every single stitch during the darkest days of my life was nothing more than a waste of time, an inefficient task that could be replaced by the click of a button. An icy chill ran down my spine, colder than any winter wind. I looked at Scott, then at Jennifer. I no longer saw my son and daughter-in-law. I saw two strangers, trapped in a world built on superficial values, on efficiency, on color palettes, and clicks of a button. A world where love was measured by a price tag and affection was demonstrated with hastily purchased gifts. And in that world, there was no place for me. There was no place for my sweater. I smiled. A real smile, but not one of happiness. It was the smile of enlightenment, the smile of someone who had just found the solution to a difficult problem. I had the confirmation I needed. "You're right, Scott," I said, my voice light and serene. "My time is very precious. So precious, in fact, that I can't afford to waste another minute of it." I walked over and gently took the sweater back from Jennifer's hands. I folded it carefully, smoothing out every crease. Then I turned to Owen, who was watching me with wide, worried eyes. I knelt down to his level. "Owen, Grandma loves you very much. Don't you ever forget that." I kissed his forehead, a long, lingering kiss. Then I stood up and turned my back on the two adults who were standing there, frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. I didn't say another word. No accusations, no anger, just a dignified silence. I walked out that door, leaving their cold world behind me. As the door clicked shut, I felt like I had shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying on my shoulders for years. I no longer felt hurt. I felt free. As I got into my car, I didn't drive back to my little apartment. I turned the car around, heading toward the lake, toward the mountains, toward my future. The car rolled away from that beautiful but soulless neighborhood, leaving behind the picture-perfect houses and the empty souls within them. I didn't glance once in the rearview mirror. The past was behind me. My full attention was on the road ahead, a winding path that hugged the shore of Lake Tahoe, shimmering under the afternoon winter sun. Even the air inside the car seemed to change. The tense, stuffy feeling was gone, replaced by a crisp, exhilarating freshness, like the cold breeze coming off the lake through a cracked window. I didn't drive back to the apartment. That place, for all its coziness, was a symbol of my old life, a life of waiting and enduring. Tonight, I needed something else. A place that could contain the new, powerful energy surging through me. I drove straight to the mansion, my home. As the heavy, wrought iron gates slowly swung open before me, a quiet sense of power settled over me. It wasn't arrogance, but the feeling of being the master of my own destiny. I drove down the white gravel path, lined with snow-dusted old-growth pines, and pulled up in front of the main entrance. The mansion's entire glass facade reflected the brilliant sunset, turning it into a giant, fiery jewel set against the white winter landscape. I stepped inside. The air still smelled of fresh paint and the pine from the exposed beams high up on the vaulted ceiling. The silence here was different from the silence in my apartment. It wasn't heavy and lonely. It was vast, majestic, and full of promise. It was the silence of a grand stage waiting for the play to begin. I walked straight to the living room, with its massive stone fireplace and a wall of glass that looked directly out onto the lake. The moon was beginning to weave its silvery threads across the mirror-still water. I stood there in the dark, with only the flickering firelight and the moonlight for company. I let the grandeur of the house and of nature itself seep into my very bones. I felt my own smallness, but not in a helpless way. It was the smallness of an individual in the face of eternity, and that very fact made every moment of life that much more precious. The confrontation at Scott's house had erased any final doubts. My plan was no longer a spontaneous act of revenge. It had become a necessity. A necessary act to reclaim my own self-worth, to honor true relationships, and to live up to the promise I had made to myself. I wasn't going to throw a Christmas party. No. That was their word, a word now tainted by pretense. I was going to host a rebirth celebration. A celebration not just for the birth of Christ, but for my own rebirth. A thank you to life for giving me a second chance. And at this celebration, there would be no room for those who only understood material value. My guests would be the people who had walked with me through the valley of the shadow of death, the people who gave me warmth when I was at my coldest, the people who saw my worth even when I was at my weakest and most broken. They were my true nuclear family. I walked to the antique telephone table in the library. I didn't need a phone book. These names and numbers were etched in my heart. I sat down in a soft leather chair, picked up the receiver, and began to make the most important calls of my life. The first call was to Mrs. Gable, the kind, silver-haired neighbor from the floor below, a woman who had lost her husband years ago, just like me, but she never let sorrow turn her bitter. Throughout my time in the hospital and the long weeks of recovery at home, not a single day went by that she didn't bring me a bowl of hot soup. Not fancy soups, just simple chicken noodle, tomato, or vegetable. But every bowl was filled with genuine care, an ingredient no five-star restaurant could ever buy. "Hello, Diane. Is that you, dear?" Her voice was as warm as her soup. "Yes, it's me, Mrs. Gable." I smiled, a real smile for the first time that day. "I'm sorry to call so late. Are you busy?" "Oh, heavens no, it's not late. Us old folks don't sleep much. I'm just watching an old movie on TV. Is something wrong? Are you all right?" Worry immediately crept into her voice. "I'm more than all right, Mrs. Gable. I'm better than ever. I'm calling because I'd like to invite you to something. I'm hosting a little celebration on Christmas Eve, a rebirth celebration. I want to thank the most important people in my life, and you, my dear Mrs. Gable, are at the top of that list." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her sniffling. "Oh, Diane, you sweet girl. Of course I'll be there. I'm so happy for you, my dear. So happy. Then I'll drive over to pick you up on the afternoon of the 24th? That would be lovely, dear. I'll wear my best dress." The second call was to Mr. Frank, a retired, widowed firefighter with an all-consuming passion for roses. His rose garden was the pride of our entire apartment complex. Mr. Frank was a man of few words, a bit of a curmudgeon on the surface, but he had a heart of gold. He didn't know how to show he cared with words. He showed it with actions. He was the one who, rain or shine, had patiently driven his old pickup truck to take me to every single one of my radiation appointments because, as he put it, these taxi drivers nowadays are just reckless. He would sit for hours in the waiting room, not saying a word, just quietly reading a newspaper, but his steady, solid presence gave me incredible strength. "Frank here." His voice was always gruff. "Hello, Mr. Frank. It's Diane." "Oh, Miss Diane. Something wrong? Aphids attacking your roses again?" I laughed. "No, sir. The roses are fine. I'm calling to invite you to something. I'm having a little get-together on Christmas Eve to celebrate everything. I wouldn't be here today without your help. Will you come?" Another pause. I could almost picture his wrinkled face, trying to process such an emotional piece of information. A party? I'm too old for all that noise," he grumbled, but I could hear the warmth behind his gruff exterior. "But, since you put it that way, will there be turkey?" "Absolutely. Turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie, too." "All right, put my name down then." He hung up as abruptly as he always did, but I knew he would be there, and he would be the first to arrive. The next calls were to the other important pieces of my rebirth puzzle, Dr. Evans, the surgeon with the golden hands and the kind smile that had reassured me before the operation, the young nurse named Maria, who had stayed up all night with me after my first chemo session, holding my hand and telling me about her dreams, and a few close friends who hadn't abandoned me, who had called every single day just to ask, "How are you holding up today?" With every call, my guest list grew, and with every heartfelt "yes," my heart filled up a little more. I never mentioned Scott or Jennifer. This party wasn't about them, it was about us. It was about the people who had formed an invisible net of love, a net that had caught me when I was about to fall. When I hung up after the last call, a deep sense of peace washed over me. I looked out the window. The moonlight still stretched across the lake. The fire still crackled, but the house was no longer empty. I could already picture it on Christmas Eve, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of roasting turkey. There would be no expensive, soulless gifts, no fake conversations. There would only be the warmth of human connection. I stood up, walked to the desk, and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. With a firm stroke of the pen, I wrote across the top, "Plan for the Rebirth celebration." That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply and dreamlessly in the master bedroom of the mansion. I slept in the large bed, under a soft down comforter, and in my sleep, I smiled, because I knew that this Christmas, I wouldn't be alone. I would be home, truly home. The final days leading up to Christmas passed in a whirlwind of preparations, but this wasn't the stressful, exhausting busyness I used to feel trying to please Scott's family. This was a flurry of excitement and joy. I would wake up each morning in the mansion as the first rays of sunlight cut through the mist over the lake and feel a clear sense of purpose. Every small task I undertook, from choosing the menu to arranging fresh flowers, was an affirmation of my life and my freedom. I hired a small, local event planning company run by two enthusiastic young women. I didn't want anything too flashy or ostentatious. I told them, "I want to create a space that feels like a warm hug, elegant but not distant, and filled with light." They understood me perfectly. Thousands of tiny, warm yellow lights were strung through the pine trees in the garden, transforming the large property into a sparkling fairy tale forest. The gravel path was lit with small torches, guiding the guests to the main entrance. Inside, the Christmas tree that nearly touched the 2-story ceiling was decorated not with cold silver baubles, but with handmade wooden ornaments, gilded pine cones, and ribbons the color of deep red wine. The stone fireplace roared to life, radiating warmth and the faint scent of pine. On the long, rustic oak dining table, instead of expensive porcelain, I chose handcrafted ceramic plates in a warm cream color, simple yet elegant crystal glasses, and for a centerpiece, a long garland of fresh pine boughs dotted with red berries and white candles. And then, the afternoon of December 24th arrived. The sky was a cloudless, brilliant blue, a rare gift for a Lake Tahoe winter. The lake was as still as a giant mirror, reflecting the snow-covered peaks. I stood before the large mirror in my dressing room, giving myself one last look. I hadn't chosen an elaborate evening gown. Instead, I wore a velvet dress, the color of deep burgundy, the color of life, of passion, and of rebirth. It was a simple design, but exquisitely tailored, draping gently over my body, hiding my scars while still highlighting the grace of a woman who had weathered many storms. I wore minimal jewelry, just the pearl earrings William had given me for our 25th anniversary and a sparkling silver snowflake brooch on my lapel. As I looked at my reflection, I no longer saw the tired, resigned woman from before. I saw a queen, not the queen of any kingdom, but the queen of her own life. At 5 o'clock sharp, the first guests arrived. As I had predicted, it was Mr. Frank. He was wearing an old but neatly pressed gray wool suit and carrying a pot of vibrant red poinsettias. "Thought this would suit the place," he mumbled, thrusting the pot into my hands and avoiding eye contact. "It's absolutely perfect, Mr. Frank. Thank you so much." I smiled, accepting his gift and leading him inside. His eyes widened as he took in the splendor of the living room. Was all he said, but I knew it was his highest form of praise. Soon after, Mrs. Gable arrived, wearing her best sea blue silk dress, her kind face beaming with joy. She threw her arms around me. "Oh, Diane, you look absolutely radiant. And this house, it's like something out of a dream." The other guests arrived one by one. Dr. Evans and his wife, Nurse Maria and her fiancé, and my oldest, dearest friends. They didn't bring expensive bottles of wine or extravagant gifts. They brought sincere smiles, warm hugs, tins of homemade cookies, and happy stories. They filled the house with an energy that money could never buy: authenticity. Once everyone had arrived, the space was filled with laughter and cheerful chatter. No one talked about work, the stock market, or fancy vacations. They talked about their grandchildren, their favorite recipes, and old memories. Mr. Frank, after a glass of eggnog, became quite animated, telling stories from his younger days as a firefighter that had everyone in stitches. Mrs. Gable and the other women gathered in the kitchen, supervising the catering team I had hired and sharing their own family secret cooking tips. I stood in a corner of the room, a glass of champagne in my hand, and quietly took it all in. My heart swelled with a profound sense of gratitude. This, right here, this was Christmas. This was family. A family bound not by blood, but by love and shared humanity. When dinner was served, we all gathered around the long dining table. The flickering candlelight cast a warm glow on everyone's happy faces. The aroma of roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and cornbread filled the room. We all raised our glasses. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. I began, my voice trembling slightly with emotion. I don't have a prepared speech. I just want to say thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. I looked around the table, at each beloved face. This past year has been a challenging one for me. There were times when I thought I wouldn't be sitting here today, times when the darkness felt all-consuming. But it was because of all of you, because of the hot soups, the patient rides to the hospital, the words of encouragement, and the tightly held hands that I found my way back to the light. Tonight, I continued, my voice growing stronger, we are not just celebrating Christmas, we are celebrating life. We are celebrating friendship. We are celebrating second chances. So please, join me in raising your glass. To rebirth. To rebirth! Everyone cheered in unison, the sound of crystal glasses clinking together. In that moment, I felt a deep connection to every person in that room. Together, we had created a circle of warmth, a fortress of humanity that no amount of carelessness could ever penetrate. After dinner, we all moved out to the heated patio. I had hired a friend of Mrs. Gable's daughter, a talented young harpist, to play for us. The clear, angelic notes of the harp drifted through the crisp winter air, mingling with the crackle of the outdoor fire pit. We gathered close, shoulder to shoulder, singing familiar Christmas carols together. And of course, I hadn't forgotten my mission. I asked the young harpist, who was also an amateur photographer, to capture these moments. Not stiff, posed pictures, but candid shots that caught the genuine smiles, the sparkling eyes, and the tight embraces. As the night drew to a close, I sat down at an armchair by the fire and opened my laptop. I selected the best photos, a shot of the entire group laughing around the dinner table, a picture of Mr. Frank awkwardly dancing with Mrs. Gable, and one of me standing alone by the window, raising my glass, my face glowing with happiness, with the magical backdrop of Lake Tahoe under the moonlight. I created a new photo album on my Facebook page, a page I rarely used, and under the album, I wrote a short caption, but it said everything I wanted to say. Celebrating Christmas and a second chance at life, eternally grateful for the family who held my hand through the storm. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't have to. I knew, one way or another, these images would find their way to the people who needed to see them. When I clicked post, I didn't feel a shred of spite or triumph. I just felt a release. I had told my story, not with bitter words, but with images of joy and vitality. I hadn't built a wall to shut them out. I had simply built a new home for myself, a home built on love and respect. About 20 miles away, on another slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains, a different kind of Christmas was taking place. In Scott and Jennifer's luxury cabin, everything was perfect, at least on the surface. The marble fireplace was lit, but its flames seemed to give off no warmth, only a cold light that reflected off the expensive designer furniture. The tree was decorated strictly according to the winter silver theme, sparkling and elegant, but without a single handmade ornament to hold a memory. The air smelled of a high-end pine and vanilla-scented candle, an artificial fragrance trying to imitate real coziness. Dinner was over. The menu had been prepared by a private chef, featuring complex dishes with French names that none of them fully understood. Jennifer's parents, the Wallaces, sat on a white leather sofa, sipping fine wine and discussing stock prices. Owen, after being forced to sit still through dinner and answer questions about his academic achievements, had now been allowed to retreat to a corner with his tablet. Jennifer was scrolling through her phone, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was busy posting carefully curated photos to Instagram, a shot of the family with forced smiles by the tree, a picture of the perfectly set dining table, a photo of a wine glass artfully placed by the fire. Each picture was accompanied by a cliché hashtag, number family first, number blessed, number perfect Christmas. She was constructing a fairy tale, a version of her life she wanted the world to believe in. Scott, on the other hand, seemed restless. He stood by the window, staring out into the pitch-black night, constantly running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He wasn't really part of his in-laws' conversation. A small, gnawing guilt was eating at him. He had completed the difficult task of calling his mother. He had gotten the private and hassle-free Christmas that Jennifer wanted. So why did he feel so empty? He tried to push away the image of his mother, all alone in her small apartment, but it kept creeping back into his mind. She'll be fine, he told himself. She's always so reasonable. Just then, his phone vibrated. A text from his cousin, Susan. Scott opened it, assuming it was just a standard Christmas greeting. But it wasn't a greeting. It was a screenshot. Scott squinted at his phone's screen. The photo was of a woman standing by a window, raising a glass, smiling radiantly. Behind her was a breathtaking view of a lake and mountains. The woman looked familiar, yet strangely foreign. She was wearing a red velvet dress, looking elegant and full of life. It was his mother, but it wasn't the simple, somewhat dowdy mother he knew. This was a different version, a version that glowed. Beneath the photo was the caption, "Celebrating Christmas and a second chance at life. Eternally grateful for the family who held my hand through the storm." And below that was Susan's message. "Aunt Diane looks amazing. So glad she's doing well after her treatment. You two must be so proud." Scott read the message 3 times. Each word was like a tiny hammer tapping against his skull. "Treatment?" He froze. Treatment for what? His mother had never said anything about needing treatment. Did she have a bad flu? Arthritis? It couldn't be anything serious. His mother was always healthy. Jennifer, noticing her husband's stunned expression, curiously peered over his shoulder. "What is it, honey?" She saw the picture. Her first reaction wasn't concern, but a mix of jealousy and disbelief. Where is this? Where did she get the money to be in a place like that? And who is this family? Her voice was sharp as a knife. The image of her frumpy mother-in-law living a life more glamorous than her own was an unbearable insult. "I don't know," Scott stammered, his mind still reeling from the word treatment. His phone buzzed again. This time, a Facebook notification. A mutual family friend had commented on his mother's photo album. Scott's hand trembled as he tapped on it. And then, his entire world fell apart. It wasn't just one picture. It was a whole album. Dozens of photos appeared, each one a dagger to his carefully constructed perfection. His mother, laughing brightly at a lavish dinner table, surrounded by strangers who all looked genuinely happy. His mother, dancing with some old man in a massive living room. His mother, sitting by a fire pit, shoulder to shoulder with friends, singing their hearts out. The house in the photos wasn't her small, familiar apartment. It was a mansion, a palace of wood and glass, both magnificent and warm. Every photo radiated a genuine joy, a deep connection, all the things his own perfect party was missing. And then, he read the comments. "Diane, you look absolutely wonderful. It's so good to see you smiling like this after everything you've been through. What a beautiful way to celebrate your recovery. Sending you all my love. You are such a warrior. You are so lucky to have such amazing friends by your side during the tough times. Scott and Jennifer must be so grateful to them." Tough times? Recovery? Warrior? The words swirled in Scott's mind, creating a vortex of confusion and fear. There was a story happening, a critically important story about his mother's life, and he knew nothing about it. He, her only son, had been written out of the narrative. Jennifer was reading the comments over his shoulder. Her expression shifted from jealousy to pure rage. "She's doing this on purpose. She's trying to embarrass us in front of everyone. She's making up some story to make us look like terrible people." "Shut up, Jennifer," Scott snapped, a rare occurrence for him. He had no mental space for his wife's bruised ego. A cold fear, far greater than any fear of public embarrassment, was squeezing his heart. His mother had been sick, seriously sick, so sick that people were calling her a warrior. And he, the son in finance who prided himself on being on top of every piece of information, had no clue. He shakily dialed his mother's number. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. His mother's familiar, warm voice came on. "Hello, you've reached Diane. I can't come to the phone right now. Please leave a message." He hung up. His hands were slick with sweat. The perfect party was over. The air in the cabin was now thick with tension and unanswered questions. The Wallaces, sensing something was wrong, made a hasty departure. Owen, feeling the unrest, had quietly gone to his room. Only Scott and Jennifer were left in the cold living room. "We have to go there," Scott said, his voice hoarse. "Right now." "Go where?" "We don't even know where there is," Jennifer protested, but her own voice was trembling slightly. "I'll find out," Scott said, the panic in him now hardening into a steely resolve. "I have to know what's going on." He looked out the window, where the night had completely enveloped the mountain. But he no longer saw the peace of nature. He only saw a vast, immeasurable distance that had just opened up between him and his mother. The Christmas morning sunrise usually brings a feeling of joy and peace, but for me, this dawn held a deeper meaning. I was awakened not by an alarm clock, but by the first brilliant golden rays of the new day dancing across Lake Tahoe. I was lying in the large bed in the master bedroom of the mansion, curled up in a warm-down comforter. Through the enormous glass wall, the natural scenery unfolded like a majestic watercolor painting. A thin layer of morning mist hung over the water, and the distant peaks were tinged with a soft pink from the rising sun. For the first time in a very long time, I woke up without the weight of expectation or a vague sense of dread. I felt light. I felt at peace. I didn't rush out of bed. I lay there, savoring each moment. The sound of birds chirping on the deck, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, the faint aroma of coffee wafting up from the kitchen, where Mrs. Gable, an early riser like me, was already brewing a pot. Last night was wonderful. This house, once just an empty architectural structure, had been filled with laughter, with friendship, and with the warmth of human connection. It had truly become a home. After slipping on a soft silk robe, I went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Gable was there, greeting me with a smile. "Good morning, lady of the manor." "Coffee?" "Good morning, Mrs. Gable." "Yes, please. Did you sleep well last night?" "Better than I have in ages," she replied, handing me a hot porcelain mug. "It's been a long time since I've had that much fun. You've created something truly special here, Diane." We went out onto the deck together, settling into comfortable armchairs, sipping our hot coffee, and watching the lake slowly awaken. We didn't talk much. Between true friends, silence can be a meaningful form of communication. I knew that sooner or later, Scott would come. The storm I had sown last night would undoubtedly find its way to my doorstep, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I had spent the night thinking, not about what I would say to hurt him, but about what I would say so that he might finally understand. The truth, sometimes, is the sharpest blade, but it is also the most effective tool for healing. Around 9 in the morning, as Mrs. Gable and I were cleaning up the last remnants of the party, my phone rang. It was my cousin, Susan. "Diane, are you okay?" Her voice was full of concern. "Scott just called me. He was asking for your address." He sounded panicked. "He kept asking about your treatment." I didn't know what to say, so I just told him to ask you directly. "Thank you for letting me know, Susan. You did the right thing. I'm fine." "Just let him come," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. So, he was on his way. About an hour later, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine. A sleek, black luxury SUV was speeding down the gravel driveway. It screeched to a halt in front of the main entrance. The doors flew open. Scott and Jennifer got out. They looked wretched. Scott was still wearing yesterday's clothes, his expensive cashmere sweater now wrinkled. His usually perfectly coiffed hair was a mess. Dark circles were stark against the skin under his bloodshot eyes, a clear sign of a sleepless, frantic night. Jennifer, who always appeared flawless, looked no better. Her makeup was smudged, and a few strands of hair had escaped her elegant updo. They no longer looked like the social media power couple. They looked like two survivors of a shipwreck. They stood there for a long moment, stunned by the grandeur of the house. Jennifer's mouth hung open as she took in the private dock and the meticulously landscaped gardens. Scott just stared at the house, his expression a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. Finally, Scott summoned his courage, walked up the stone steps, and rang the bell. I didn't open the door right away. I let them wait. I wanted them to have enough time to feel the foreignness of this place, to understand that they were no longer in their comfort zone. They were standing on the threshold of a world they knew absolutely nothing about. After a few minutes that must have felt like an eternity, I opened the door. I stood there, in my silk robe, holding my coffee cup, my silver hair tied back neatly. I looked at them, not with anger or triumph, but with a calm, almost detached serenity. "Hello, you two," I said softly. "I wasn't expecting you quite so soon." Scott stared at me, as if he were looking at a stranger. "Mom," he stammered, at a loss for words. Jennifer, after her initial shock, regained a sliver of her usual imperious attitude. "Where is this? What are you doing here?" I smiled, a mysterious little smile. "This is my home. Please come in." I turned and walked inside, leaving them to follow. They stepped into the living room, sheer astonishment on their faces. Their eyes scanned the room, from the high, exposed pine beams to the massive stone fireplace, finally landing on the wall of glass overlooking the lake. "This is impossible," Jennifer whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "Where did you get the money?" Scott wasn't interested in money. He walked right up to me, his bloodshot eyes boring into mine. "Mom," he said, his voice raw with suppressed emotion. "What's this about treatment? Everyone on Facebook, they're saying you were sick. Why didn't you tell me anything?" Finally, the most important question had been asked. I set my coffee cup down on a wooden table. I looked my son directly in the eye. The calm wall I had erected around myself began to show cracks. "What are you doing, Mom?" Scott repeated, his voice now laced with anger. "Are you trying to embarrass us on purpose? Posting those pictures, making up some story so everyone will pity you and attack us? Make it up?" I cut him off, my voice now as cold as ice. "Do you really think I could make up cancer, Scott?" The word cancer hung in the room, sharp and brutal. Scott staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Cancer?" he whispered, his face ashen. Jennifer was also stunned, her eyes wide with horror. This time, her arrogance was completely gone. I stood there, looking at the two people crumbling before me. I felt no pity. I felt no satisfaction. I just felt a profound sadness. A sadness for the unbridgeable gap that had formed between us. "Why?" Scott looked up, tears beginning to well in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" And that's when I decided to tell them the truth, not to condemn, but so they would understand. "But I did tell you, Scott." My voice rang out, clear and firm in the silence of the room. I did. Those two sentences hung in the still air of the living room, heavy with unspoken weight. They weren't an accusation shouted in anger, but a calm statement of fact, and it was that very calmness that was the most terrifying thing of all. Scott's head snapped up, his already pale face now a canvas of pure confusion. With tears still streaming down his cheeks, he shook his head frantically, like a child. "No, that's not possible. You never said anything. I would have remembered if you'd said something that important." "Are you sure, Scott?" I asked, my voice still perfectly even, without a ripple of emotion. I walked closer to the window, turning my back to them slightly, looking out at the calm lake. I didn't want to see his collapse. Not yet. Right now, I needed the strength of the mountains and the stillness of the water to keep myself from breaking. I remember it perfectly, I continued, my voice echoing off the wooden walls. It was June 15th, a Tuesday. It was a beautiful, sunny day. I remember because I was lying in the recovery room, staring at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam coming through the window. I had just gotten out of a 6-hour surgery. I paused, letting each detail sink into his chaotic mind. I could hear Jennifer's sharp intake of breath behind me. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The nurse had just helped me sit up. The very first thing I did, after making sure I was still alive, was to ask her for my phone. There was only one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to hear your voice. I turned back around, looking Scott directly in the eye. His eyes were wide now, filled with a dawning horror. A memory, buried under tons of meetings and numbers, was beginning to surface. I dialed your number. It rang 3 times. Then you picked up. I recounted it with the precision of someone reading a report. You sounded rushed. I hadn't even finished saying, "Scott, honey, it's Mom," before you cut me off. I closed my eyes, and his voice from that day echoed in my head, crystal clear. I cleared my throat and perfectly imitated his impatient tone. "Mom, what's up? I'm walking into a really important meeting right now. Really important. Is it an emergency?" The color drained from Scott's face. He took a step back, his hand flying to his mouth. He remembered. I opened my eyes, my gaze as sharp as a scalpel. "I tried to tell you," I said. "Scott, I just wanted to cave it." But you cut me off again. I continued the imitation. "Mom, I really don't have time for this right now. I'll call you back later, okay? I have to go." And then you hung up. I finished, my voice now barely a whisper. "You never called back, Scott." Silence enveloped the room. It was so thick and heavy you could almost feel it. Even the crackling of the fire in the hearth seemed to have gone quiet. In that silence, the only sound was the choked, agonized sob that escaped from Scott. He completely fell apart. He slid off the edge of the chair and crumpled onto the Persian rug, clutching his head in his hands. The large, solid frame of a successful man was racked with shudders, like a lost little boy. "No, no, oh God, no," he mumbled. Not to me, but to the guilt that was tearing him apart. Jennifer stood frozen, her face completely bloodless. Her shell of arrogance had shattered into 1,000 pieces. For the first time, she looked at me, not with condescension, but with genuine fear. She was afraid of the woman standing before her, a woman who could recall every trivial detail with such terrifying accuracy. And perhaps she was also beginning to fear herself and her own role in this tragedy. I let the truth and the silence do their work for a few minutes. I let Scott drown in his own regret. This was a necessary pain, a purifying fever he had to endure on his own. Finally, I walked over to the knitting basket I had brought from the apartment the night before. I placed it on the coffee table, right in front of them. I gently lifted the lid and took out the jade green sweater. In the morning light of the living room, its color looked so vibrant, so alive. "Do you see this?" I asked, my voice finally trembling a little. This was the hardest part. I knit this, not at home, in my favorite armchair. I knit it in a hospital bed. I spread the sweater out. I knit it during the weeks of radiation that followed. The weeks when my body felt like it was being burned from the inside out. The weeks when every swallow felt like I was swallowing broken glass. Every single stitch was a prayer. A prayer to live, to see Owen grow up, to have more time. I looked up at Scott, still kneeling on the floor, then glanced at Jennifer, who stood as still as a statue. "The other day when I brought this to your house, Jennifer, you said the color didn't go with your color palette. You held it as if it were something dirty." Jennifer flinched, as if she'd been zapped with electricity. "And you, Scott?" I turned back to my son, my voice no longer calm, but filled with the pain I had suppressed for so long. "You told me not to waste my time on these things. You told me to just use the click of a button. Son, you told me that the love, the hope, and the will to live that I poured into every single thread was a waste of time." I bit down on the last few words, and that's when the emotional dam I had been holding back for so long finally broke. The tears started to flow, not tears of weakness, but tears of anguish, of the pain of having your love so carelessly trampled upon. "Do you understand, Scott?" I sobbed. "You didn't just forget a phone call, you forgot your mother. You were so busy building a perfect life that you edited out the person who brought you into it. You left me to fight the hardest battle of my life, alone." I sank into the armchair, my body trembling. My energy was gone. The truth was out. Everything had been said. The rest was no longer up to me. Scott raised his head, his face a mess of tears and misery. He looked at me, then at the sweater, then back at me. In his eyes, I didn't just see regret, I saw a horrifying realization. He finally understood. Not just about my illness, but about his own failure as a son. He crawled across the floor and came to my feet. "Mom," he cried, his voice broken. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. God, I'm such a monster. I'm so sorry." He buried his head in my lap and sobbed like a child. I didn't embrace him. I didn't push him away. I just sat there, motionless, letting his hot tears soak into my silk robe and letting the sound of his weeping echo through this magnificent, broken house. Scott's cries echoed in the vast living room, a raw, naked sound of anguish. It was no longer the whimper of a child, but the roar of a soul that has just realized it has made an unforgivable mistake. He kept his head buried in my lap, his large frame shaking, broken apologies tumbling out between sobs. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible person. I didn't know. How could I?" I sat perfectly still. My hand rested on the arm of the chair, inches from his disheveled hair, but I didn't reach out to comfort him. I couldn't. A part of me wanted to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay, just as I had 1,000 times when he was a boy who'd skinned his knee. But the woman who would have done that no longer existed. She had died in that lonely hospital bed, waiting for a call that never came. Jennifer, after moments of being frozen in place, finally moved. She tiptoed forward, her eyes red, her face pale and stripped of all its usual arrogance. She knelt beside Scott, but didn't dare touch me. "Diane," she began, her voice trembling, using a name she had never used for me before. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I was so stupid and selfish. That sweater, it's beautiful, it's truly beautiful." Her belated confession offered me no comfort. It felt like empty words, a feeble attempt to patch up a tear that was far too wide. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself. My own tears had stopped. In their place was a hollow emptiness, a bone-deep exhaustion. I had carried this burden alone for so long. Now that it was out, I felt utterly spent. Gently, but firmly, I pushed Scott away. It wasn't a rough shove, but a deliberate movement, creating a physical distance between us. He looked up at me, the tear-streaked face of a 42-year-old man looking utterly pathetic. "Get up, Scott." My voice was no longer sharp, just tired. "You too, Jennifer." They scrambled to their feet like two scolded children, not daring to meet my eyes. I leaned back in the chair, gazing out the window. The lake was still calm, the mountains still stood tall. Nature was so indifferent. It was completely unaware of the human tragedy unfolding in this magnificent house. "Do you think an apology can change anything?" I asked, my voice flat. "Can it erase 6 months of loneliness and fear? Can it give me back the nights of peaceful sleep instead of nightmares about chemicals and radiation? Can it make the phone call I waited for my entire life magically appear?" Each question was a knife, twisting in their wounds. Scott started to sob again. "No, it can't," he stammered. "Then stop apologizing." I cut him off. "Words are meaningless now. I didn't need your apologies. I needed your presence. I needed my son." I turned to face them. My gaze now crystal clear, devoid of anger, filled only with a cold truth. "I didn't throw that party last night to punish you. Initially, maybe a small part of me wanted that, I'll admit. But as it came together, I realized something else. I wasn't doing it for you. I was doing it for me." I gestured around the splendid room. "This house, this party, all of this, it wasn't a show to make you jealous. It was my declaration of independence, a statement that my life still has value, that I deserve to live, to be happy, to be surrounded by people who genuinely love and appreciate me. I learned a very hard lesson in that hospital bed, Scott. I learned that I have to save myself because no one else is going to do it for me, not even my own son. Those last words landed like a final, fatal blow. Scott swayed, and if Jennifer hadn't grabbed his arm, he might have collapsed again. "Mom," he whispered, "what can we do to fix this?" "Anything. Just tell us, and we'll do it." That's when I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them walk out of here with the easy hope of forgiveness. Healing, if it was ever going to happen, would have to be rebuilt from the ground up on entirely new terms. "You can't fix the past," I said definitively, "but you can decide what your future will look like." I stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. The cold morning breeze swept in, carrying the scent of pine and snow. I need time. I need space. I need quiet to heal the pieces of myself that you helped to break. I can't do that with you here, with your guilt and your apologies. "Are you kicking us out?" Jennifer asked, her voice laced with panic. "I'm not kicking you out. I am asking you to respect my boundaries, something you haven't done for a very long time." I looked them straight in the eye. "Go home. Take a long, hard look at your lives. Ask yourselves what is truly important: a perfect color palette or a warm heart, an important meeting or a call from your mother. When can we see you again?" Scott asked, his voice desperate. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe in a week, maybe in a month, maybe longer. That doesn't depend on me. It depends on you. When you truly understand, not just in your heads but in your hearts, what you have done, then you can call me. But don't call to apologize. Call to tell me how you have changed." I stepped aside, leaving the doorway clear. It was a silent gesture, but a powerful one. Scott and Jennifer looked at each other, then at me. In their eyes was desperation, loss, and the faintest glimmer of understanding. They had lost something incredibly precious, not an inheritance, but the unconditional trust and love of a mother. And they knew to earn it back would be a long and difficult journey. They walked silently out the door, not daring to look back. I watched the black SUV back out of the gravel driveway and disappear behind the line of pine trees. When the car was gone, I slowly closed the heavy oak door. The click of the latch echoed, not with the sound of an ending, but with the sound of a new beginning. A beginning protected by a door, by a boundary. I leaned my back against the door, and for the first time all day, I let out a long, deep breath. I had done it. I had spoken my truth. I had protected myself. I turned to look back into my house. Mrs. Gable was standing at the end of the hall, watching me with eyes full of sympathy and concern. She had heard everything. She said nothing, just quietly walked over and wrapped her arms around me. And this time, as I cried in her embrace, they were not tears of anguish or pain. The months after that, Christmas passed quietly, like Lake Tahoe after a storm. The violent waves of emotion subsided, returning the water's surface to its natural peace, though deep below, the undercurrents were still shifting. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow on the mountain peaks began to melt, forming little streams that trickled down into the valley. The first green shoots pushed their way up from the cold earth, carrying the promise of new beginnings. And so did my life. I didn't sell the mansion. It was no longer a stage for revenge. It had truly become my sanctuary. I sold the small apartment with all its bittersweet memories and moved to the lake for good. Every morning, I woke up to a majestic, natural vista, and every evening, I fell asleep to the gentle rhythm of the waves. I found peace not in forgiving others, but in learning to love and cherish myself. My life was now filled with simple, authentic joys. I joined Mr. Frank's gardening club, and under his somewhat gruff mentorship, I cultivated a magnificent rose garden on my deck. Mrs. Gable and I took a watercolor painting class, and we would spend our afternoons together, capturing the beauty of the lake through the seasons. My house was never empty of laughter. My friends, my true family, visited often. We would cook together, play cards, or simply sit by the fire, sharing life's stories. I no longer felt lonely. I realized that family isn't always about blood ties. Sometimes, it's the people you choose to weather the storms with. Scott kept his word. He didn't bother me. For the first few weeks, the silence from his end was absolute. I knew it wasn't out of anger or giving up, it was respect. He was giving me the space I needed. About a month later, he started calling. They weren't the rushed, efficient calls from before. Just short calls, every Sunday evening. There was a change in his voice. It was deeper, slower, and held a humility I had never heard before. "Hi, Mom, it's me. I'm just calling to see how you are," he would begin, and I would answer politely, but with a measure of distance. "I'm well, thank you, Scott." We talked about trivial things. The weather, my rose garden, a good movie I had seen. He never mentioned Jennifer or Owen, unless I asked. He never apologized again. He just listened. For the first time in years, I felt like he was truly listening to me, not just waiting for his turn to speak. Then one beautiful Sunday in late April, he asked, "Mom, next week, could I come visit for a little while? Just me. I won't stay long." I hesitated. A part of me was still wary, still afraid of being hurt. But another part told me that if I shut the door completely, I would also be trapping myself in the past. "All right," I replied. Saturday afternoon. He came. Alone. He didn't bring any expensive gift baskets, just a simple bouquet of daffodils, the flower of new beginnings. He wasn't wearing a stiff business suit, just a sweater and jeans. He looked simpler, and somehow, more vulnerable. We sat on the deck and drank tea. Our conversation was still a bit awkward, an invisible distance still hung between us, but this time, it was different. He told me he had started going to therapy. He talked about how he was learning to slow down, to recognize what was truly important. He didn't blame Jennifer. He took full responsibility for his own carelessness. "I was always running," he said, his eyes gazing out at the lake. "Running after success, after money, after the image of a successful man. I was running so fast that I left the most important things behind. I left you behind." I said nothing. I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement. After that, his visits became more regular, always alone. Gradually, our conversations became more natural. He asked me about my fight with the illness, and this time, I told him. I told him about the pain, the fear, and the small glimmers of hope. He sat and listened, without interruption, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. But one thing had changed forever. Our relationship. It was different. I still loved him. He was my flesh and blood, my only son. But some cracks, once they appear, can never be fully mended. The absolute trust, the unconditional bond between a mother and her son, a part of it was gone. I could talk to him, I could share things, but I could no longer open my heart to him completely as I once had. A thin, invisible protective shell had formed around my heart, and I knew I would never let it completely disappear. I would always be his mother, and he would always be my son. We would continue to see each other, to talk, to fulfill our mother-son duties. But the innocent warmth of that relationship was gone forever, replaced by a more formal respect and an unspoken sadness. One afternoon, as he was about to leave, he stood at the door and said, "I know it's probably too late to say this, Mom, but I'm really proud of you. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." I smiled, a serene smile. "Thank you, son. I've learned that about myself, too." As I watched his car drive away, disappearing behind the pines, I no longer felt pain. I just felt a sense of acceptance. An acceptance that some chapters of life are closed and new ones will be written in a different way. I turned and walked back into my house. The late afternoon sun filled every room, bathing everything in a warm golden light. I went out to the deck, sat in my favorite armchair, and watched the sunset over the lake. The sky was a beautiful mix of orange, pink, and purple. I no longer thought about the past, nor did I worry too much about the future. I was simply there, in the present moment, breathing in the fresh spring air. I am Diane. I am 66 years old. I am a survivor, a gardener, an artist, a friend, and finally, after a long journey, I was truly free. The The phone call that winter didn't steal my Christmas. On the contrary, it gave me back the rest of my life. And that, in the end, was the most precious gift of all. When you've seen more than 60 seasons of leaves fall, you start to see life differently. You no longer see it as a straight road stretching ahead, but more like a great, vast lake. Some days are as smooth as glass, reflecting the whole of the blue sky. Other days are choppy, stormy, making you feel like you could be swallowed whole. But in the end, after all of it, the lake always finds its way back to its own quiet stillness. I used to spend so much of my time trying to pilot other people's boats on my lake. I worried about their direction, feared they would go astray, feared they would crash. I forgot that my job wasn't to be the captain of anyone else's life, not even my son's. My job was to tend to my own lake, to keep its waters clear, and to enjoy its beauty, whether on a sunny day or in the middle of a storm. My battle with a terrible illness taught me a cruel but precious lesson. This body is mine, this time is mine, and no one has the right to make me live a life where I no longer feel happy. The carelessness of those I loved most was, ironically, a blessing in disguise. It cut the final cord of expectation, of blind duty, and gave me back the right to be myself. I realized that forgiveness isn't always about forgetting and going back to the way things were. Sometimes, the truest form of forgiveness is accepting that things have changed, and then peacefully walking forward on your own new path. I let go of the burden of being the perfect mother or the reasonable grandmother. I stopped trying to fit into a small box that others had built for me. I built myself a whole house instead. Now, when I wake up each morning, I don't feel the weight of anything. I just feel gratitude, grateful to still be breathing this fresh air, grateful for the friends who walked with me through the darkest days, grateful even for the scars, because they remind me just how strong I have become. Sometimes, when I'm sitting alone on the deck, watching the small waves lap against the shore, I think about it all. I no longer feel resentment or sadness. I just feel a deep understanding. That love, just like a lake, needs room to breathe. And sometimes, the best way to love someone else is to love yourself first. And in the quiet of the sunset over the lake, I found my answer. Peace doesn't come from holding on to what was lost. It comes from the courage to let go. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.